This is Greg Remke. Throughout the school year, I've been giving workshops to homeschool speech and debate students who are debating a topic on the United Nations, calling for reforming or abolishing the United Nations. This is the NCFCA national debate topic, and I wanted to put some of the presentations online for students who weren't able to attend or who forgot and want to, endlessly watch the presentations over and over. But I also want to give some background for general talks that I've been giving on the sort of the contrast between nation states and cities. The challenge with the United Nations topic is the United Nations is a forum for nations, that is nation states, to solve problems. That is good in the sense that the UN was set up after World War II to prevent, another world war, to find a way for diplomatic disputes to be disputes to be handled diplomatically through the UN forum rather than through troops on the battlefield. But there was a major debate at the time that the UN was founded, as there is today, on the proper role of government in the economy, the role of government in the free society. At the time the UN was founded, very much influenced by Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt, the United Nations became sort of the forum for the four freedoms that Franklin Roosevelt proposed as part of the New Deal to be sort of sent out to the world, so that every nation had an obligation or a mission to provide these four freedoms. And some of these, of course, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, terrific, but freedom from want was one of the four freedoms, and that Roosevelt advocated, and it was part of the New Deal effort for the federal government to step in and try and revive the economy that had so long been down through the Great Depression. So one of the challenges of the United Nations is United Nations governments are trying to manage their economies, boost their economies. And so that's a little bit of what I'll be discussing in the problem with the United Nations, and contrast the role of nations or states in managing the economy versus cities, versus the natural spontaneous order force of cities in creating wealth through human history. So let's and I have a number of books that I'll recommend that are listed on the screen now, and I'll get to these through the presentation. So let me start with some amazing books that have come out in recent years. One's called Arrival City by Doug Saunders. It's about the worldwide migration, the greatest migration in the history of mankind, of people to cities around the world. In India, Africa, China, Latin America, people are migrating from the countrysides, from rural areas, from farms, and moving into the city. And this is very much what happened in Western Europe and the United States in the 1600s, 1700s, accelerating in the 1800s and early 1900s. So what makes the city a better place to be? And of course, any town in America is the size of cities were in the 17 and 1800s. So people move into the city because there's advantages for exchange. And in economics, people exchange not things of equal value, but of things that are to them of greater value. Every exchange creates wealth. And in cities, there's more opportunities for exchange. So Arrival City has great chapters on Istanbul, on other cities around the world that are creating vast amounts of wealth because they are relatively free, relatively open for economic exchange. Triumph of the City by Edward Glaeser of the Manhattan Institute is another text that looks at how great cities are. Even, he argues, even the shanty towns in India and the developing world, people move there by choice. They prefer those cities than the countryside. Even as terrible as they are by Western standards or seemingly any standards, they're better than in terms of opportunity for people who come. And then I'm going to talk about charter cities as an alternative for freer, better cities, and the role that charter cities have had in history in creating helping Western civilization, and the role that the charter idea had in America's past and in the world today. So, a number of different things to try and cover in a series of short presentations. First, I want to recommend the documentary, The Commanding Heights. This is a 6-hour documentary that was on PBS in the Clinton years. It's not perfect, but it's a tremendous, interesting, engaging series of segments looking at the sort of the world battle that over the who's going to control the economy. In a sense, it starts off with an hour episode of Friedrich Hayek versus John Maynard Keynes. And Keynes argued that the federal governments needed to take over the big parts of the economy or manage them in order to get the economy out of the Great Depression. These ideas come from sort of an unexpected source. Hayek argued that no, the government, if government takes control of the economy, even with good intentions, it will lead to a road to serfdom. And so this debate that was played out in the 1920s, the Keynesians win through decades. Then the Hayekians return in the 1980s, Mises, Hayek, Milton Friedman, promoting market reforms that Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher pushed through in England and America. And at the time this was produced, that was the sense that we had left the welfare state behind and were moving toward market reforms that were hitting in China and India as well as the US and England. However, things have gone back in recent years for various reasons, but I highly recommend the documentary for context on the sort of global debate over what the role of government is. And again, this is central for the United Nations. What is the United Nations doing? Is it promoting economic freedom and progress around the world, or is it doing something else? On the Liberty Fund website, the Liberty Fund, an endowed foundation in Indianapolis, has an online library of liberty with huge numbers of books available online. They also sell marvelous editions of older books. One of the books is by Friedrich Bastiat, a collection of his essays, The Man and the Statesman. And it's highly recommended. It's not too expensive. Many of the students have read Bastiat's The Law, and these are other of his essays. One of Tracy's, so that's Bastiat, but I wanted to focus on Destoute to Tracy, who's there's a bibliography by David Hart on the Liberty Fund site. And here's the sort of the quote on this. One of Tracy's key social and economic ideas was that society is purely and solely a continual series of exchanges. It's part of this broader theory working out the ideas of free exchange. Now, of course, society is based on families and extended families and institutions and social networks and a whole range of legal norms and social norms that develop over centuries. But this idea of looking at society as exchanges is a valuable one, I think, for giving a sort of a background on the role of cities. So continually or solely a series of exchanges, the implication on this is that these exchanges create society, they create relations. So the limited exchanges in rural society is where the low population density, there isn't as much opportunity for wealth creation. Certainly farmers grow food, create value, send that food to the city and elsewhere. But these exchanges, the more dense they are, the richer society is. These high transportation costs, that is, if you're a farmer and you're 100 miles from a city, it doesn't really matter what you grow. You generally can't get it to the city, right? And you'd spend more money transporting it than the value of the good, particularly in a time when the roads are not so good. Now, if you're at a port or on a river and can put your produce on a barge and float it downstream, then all of a sudden you can join you can get things from the city in exchange, and you join this exchange operation. These opportunities for exchange, whenever they're limited, you have less knowledge, less chance to learn things, less division of labor, which is central for economics, less specialization and productivity gains. So these are economic concepts, but the point is the role of cities and freedom of exchange is creating wealth. Relevance to the UN, What is UN policy toward trade, toward promoting exchange, toward the freedom of cities and the freedom of enterprise, empowering the poor, for example, to go into different trades? In poor countries around the world, there's a layer upon layer of regulations and restrictions that make it harder for poor people to go into business, make it harder for them to exert ownership rights over their land. And the argument is these institutional foundations are important. Frank Chodorow has a great article in an issue of the Freeman. He was the former editor of the Freeman. The article is called The Humanity of Trade. And he points out that we think of trade as just material things going back and forth. But actually there's more to trade. Trade is a cultural exchange as well. When we get products from Japan, get products from Latin America, textiles and spicy foods from India, each of these goods that we consume, that we trade for, bring us a little knowledge about the places where they're from. There was a marvelous piece on YouTube, a video clip on YouTube about the person who did it had gone to Japan and gone into a stationery store and was looking at staplers, and he found two small, inexpensive staplers that are very different from any staplers available in the United States or England. That these staplers did things that are valuable, but they're not available in other places. So this is a benefit if someone exports these to the U.S. or imports them to the U.S. I'd buy one if I could. But also it tells us something about the people who made those, who wanted the precision and the features of those staplers that apparently no one in the United States has thought of for whatever reason. So it's not just that the trading brings us things of value, they give us some insight into people and places that we wouldn't know about otherwise. And so the tendency, according to Chodorow, is trade breaks down the narrowness of provincialism. It, he says, liquidates the mistrust of ignorance. Society then involves more people, a better sort of family of man, as we learn more and benefit from people in far parts of the world. The things they produce, they export to us. The things we produce, we export to them. So an article I recommend that I think could be useful to students. So in the ancient world, the ancient Greeks, in a sense, you had something similar to federalism in the United States. The ideal of federalism that the founders set up is that the United States was sort of a compact or a charter among many independent states, and these states joined together to become the United States, or a United States, to band together to prevent foreign aggression and to settle trade disputes and a few limited things. But the idea is at the state level, there would be differences, different legal institutions, different social institutions. And so from state to state, people were free to try what they thought best and were represented by their in their local governments. But if people didn't like it, they could, move to another state. And within states, Jefferson was very strong on local communities making their own decisions, so people could move a few miles and get to a place where the institutions and the legal norms were better suited to them. You want political decisions, to the extent they're made at all, to be made locally. People have the most representation in influencing them, and they have the highest ease of exit to go someplace where they would rather be. So in the ancient world, you had the Greek city-states, not a Greek nation, but the Greek city-states, the polis, and they were different. Athens was different from Sparta, was different than Corinth, and each of these had daughter cities, that is colonies, that were independent city-states that took their institution from their parent city-state, but their institutions were different. So as these colonies or additional city-states, self-governing city-states spread around the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, you had a tremendous diversity of political and economic institutions. Some cities like Athens were more open to immigration, others were less. that allowed sort of a discovery process where people could discover which institutions work best. And for people that were in trade, you had the option of trading with the city you thought worked best for your goods and services. So there was trade across the ancient world. I have more slides on this. This same sort of diversity was in the city-states of medieval times, Venice, Genoa. The Hanseatic League, was a network of Baltic city-states where each city was self-governing. It had the annual gatherings where the laws were discussed and agreed upon, but basically they were trading goods and services between these cities in the Hanseatic League, and I'll talk more about that. Again, this is a model for economic development in the ancient world, economic development in the medieval world, and it doesn't involve states. It doesn't involve nation states. It involves city-states, rural areas. There are nation states, there are princes and kings, and they're battling each other and causing all sorts of havoc. But the Hanseatic League, independent, under an imperial charter from the emperor, not the emperor from Star Wars, but the Holy Roman Empire. Now, Venice and Genoa do go to war. There's battles of various kinds. I'm not saying that everything is peace and so forth. But in terms of advancing the history we think of as nation states growing and creating wealth is deceptive in many ways. Medieval monasteries played a major role in increasing trade in and around Europe. And I'll have some more slides on this in the presentation. Charter cities of the present and the Hanseatic League of the past are again this model that's making the rules and having representation at the city level. The rise of markets, of natural rights, of self-government come with the rise of these charter cities. Remember in medieval times when you had the serf system, you had lords and serfs, and there were rights and obligations each way, right? The serfs had obligations to their lord, but the lord also had obligations to the serf. So it was a legal system of rights and responsibilities, but not one of equality. And all things considered, you'd rather be a lord than a serf. If you wanted to escape serfdom, you escaped to a city. If you could go to a free city, a charter city, and live there for a year and a day, you were a free man, a freeman. So in the ancient world, the Greeks, there's cultural institutions that promote trade. Among the Greeks, Hermes, the god of riches, god of fortune, messenger of the gods, the Greek gods called upon the Greeks to treat travelers well. Travelers, merchants traveling would bring you news, would bring you goods to trade and knowledge. And this, this exchange benefit that De Tracy talks about in later times applies to the ancient world. Trade by sea requires private property, contracts. You want to encourage entrepreneurship. And in the Greek world, as you know from reading Homer, you were supposed to provide a meal to a traveler before you even asked their name, right? So travelers knew they would be welcome among the Greeks. It was a benefit for trade. It helped advance Greek society. And this were their religious traditions called upon them to be good to people they don't know. Whereas in other tribal societies, someone you don't know show up, you kill them first and then ask questions, which you tend not to get much knowledge. So trade is a discovery process encouraging the flow of technology, innovation, and ideas. Here's a map of the ancient world. It's in German, but the yellow are the Phoenician cities, the red are the Greek cities and colonies, and you can see the diversity of colonizations. And again, these aren't controlled colonies in the modern sense as much as they are independent city-states, poli, that are derived from a mother city back in Greece or somewhere. So there's trade between all these regions. And you can see this. This is another map of trade, and you can see tin and timber and copper and silver and iron come from different areas. Grain comes from the Ukrainian areas, from Egypt, and these goods are shipped across the ancient world. And So the reason the cities are on the coast is because shipping by boat is 100 times cheaper than shipping overland. So this is where wealth and diversity and colonies are set up. If you look at the ancient Greek city-states, they would have a trading operation, let's say, in the Bulgarian or Romanian coast. Over time, that becomes more than just going there once a year to trade, but a group of Greeks live there to facilitate trade with the people that live in the area, and they're bringing knowledge, information, products from the surrounding area, trying to not get themselves killed, and they're providing goods and services to the people in that area that they hadn't produced on their own. Because remember, the Greeks have gathered this from all over the ancient world, from Egypt and elsewhere, and they are bringing these products and goods to trade in places that can't on their own reach Egypt or elsewhere. Over time, the Greek community grows, more settlers come, and then it gets a charter, becomes its own city, and grows and prospers. And this process, again, is bringing Greek culture to the world. It's also bringing world culture to the Greeks, in the sense of the people, the diversity, the ideas, the products. And by the way, so there's more to that. Anyway, not to be a discourse on the ancient world, but just showing the diversity of trade in different areas. If you fast forward some centuries to 1200, 1300, 1400, you have Venice, Genoa, and the Hansa. This has Hansa in the north, in the Baltic area, is the Hanseatic League cities, Danzig, Lubeck, Hamburg, all the way to Novgorod in Russia. Venetian commercial routes are in the dark blue, and you can see the trade through the cities there that are part of the Venetian Empire or trading network, and Genoa's commercial routes as well. And there's land routes as well, the routes between the fairs and various places, and of course along rivers often as well. But again, goods are much less expensive over water, and the cities are growing at this time. Knowledge, technology is developing and spreading around the world. There's a tremendous growth in textiles and agricultural productivity as well. This is a bigger map of the Hanseatic League across the north through Denmark, England, Norway. Again, the Hanseatic League are cities that have charters from the Holy Roman Empire to be self-governing, to make their own laws, and to, as long as they pay a tax to the local prince. So development comes to these cities, and each city, of course, is sending information and goods out to the region and drawing products from the region. Okay, let me stop with the Hanseatic League.